Right now, somewhere in the world, a system just went offline. Not because of a storm, not because of an accident, but because someone, sitting quietly behind a screen, decided to press enter. No explosions, no breaking news alert, just silence. And that's why some people believe World War III isn't coming. They believe it's already here. And the most terrifying part is that almost nobody is calling it that yet. Before we go any further, let me say this quickly and naturally. If you like stories that dig beneath the headlines, stories that connect the dots, and show you what most people miss, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. These aren't one-off videos. They build on each other. And by the end of this one, you may see the world very differently. For decades, we were taught a very specific image of global war: air raid sirens, nuclear missiles, cities reduced to ash, clear enemies, clear alliances, clear beginnings. But that version of war belonged to a different century, a different world. Today, power doesn't always announce itself with fire. It applies pressure. It destabilizes quietly. It disrupts systems people depend on so gradually that by the time panic sets in, the damage is already done. And that's why this question matters so much. Because if we're waiting for the next world war to look like the last ones, we might already be standing in the middle of it without realizing it. Think about how wars used to start: declarations, mobilizations, uniforms, speeches. Today, none of that is required. A nation can weaken another without ever officially firing a shot. All it takes is money, information, influence, access, and denial. Because the safest kind of war is the one where you can always say, "That wasn't us." And that's exactly the kind of conflict shaping the world right now. The first layer of this story is proxy war. This isn't new, but the scale is. Major powers avoid direct confrontation because direct war between nuclear, armed states is suicide. So instead, they fight through others. Smaller countries become battlegrounds. Local conflicts suddenly have global sponsors. Weapons flow in. Advisors arrive quietly. Intelligence is shared. And the fighting drags on, not because no one can end it, but because prolonging it serves larger strategic goals. The longer the conflict lasts, the more exhausted everyone becomes. Economies strain, populations fracture, and rivals watch carefully, taking notes. Here's the part most people miss. Proxy wars are not isolated events. They're signals. They test how far the world will tolerate violence without escalation. They test weapon systems in real conditions. They test public reaction. And when you see multiple proxy conflicts active at the same time, involving overlapping alliances and rival powers, that's when things shift from coincidence to coordination. That's when history starts to rhyme. Now add the second layer, cyber warfare. This is the battlefield you never see. No soldiers, no smoke, just code, and yet, its impact can be devastating. Hospitals locked out of their systems. Financial networks frozen, power grids disrupted, communication knocked offline, and unlike traditional attacks, cyber strikes can happen constantly, every day, every hour. Small probes, larger intrusions, silent escalations. Governments rarely announce these attacks publicly, not because they aren't serious, but because admitting vulnerability creates panic. So instead, they quietly patch systems, retaliate in kind, and move on. Which means, functionally, some countries are already in a state of continuous low-level conflict, even if the public never hears the word war. This is where the story gets darker, because cyber warfare isn't just about infrastructure. It's about perception. Information itself becomes a weapon. Social media manipulation, false narratives, engineered outrage, distrust. When populations can no longer agree on what's real, they become easier to divide. easier to influence, easier to weaken from the inside, and that's incredibly efficient. You don't have to defeat an enemy if you can convince them to defeat themselves. Now we move to the third layer, economic warfare. This is the slow burn, the part that feels boring until it suddenly isn't. Sanctions, trade restrictions, asset freezes, currency pressure, supply chain manipulation. These tools don't make headlines the way missiles do, but they can be just as destructive over time. Entire industries can collapse, inflation can skyrocket, unemployment can surge, and when people can't afford food, fuel, or stability, social order begins to crack. Protests turn into unrest. Unrest turns into instability, and instability creates opportunities for influence, control, and regime change without ever crossing a border. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The global economy is deeply interconnected, which means economic warfare never stays contained. When one nation is pressured, others feel the shockwaves. Prices rise everywhere. Shortages spread. And suddenly, people thousands of miles away are paying the cost of conflicts they didn't even know they were involved in. That's not a side effect. That's the point. Global pain creates global leverage. Then there's the resource battlefield. Energy, food, water, rare materials. The modern world runs on a handful of critical resources, and control over them means power. When access is threatened, nations react aggressively. Energy pipelines become strategic targets. Shipping lanes become flashpoints. Agricultural exports become political weapons. And when multiple resource pressures hit at once, the entire system starts to wobble. Not collapse instantly, wobble. And wobbling systems make people nervous. Nervous people make desperate decisions. At this stage, you might be wondering, okay, this sounds bad, but does it really count as a world war? And that's the core of the debate. Because traditionally, a world war is defined by open combat between major powers across multiple regions. But what if modern war is defined differently? What if it's defined by simultaneous global pressure across military, digital, economic, and psychological domains? What if the goal isn't immediate victory, but long-term dominance? If that's the case, then the absence of a declaration isn't evidence of peace. It's evidence of strategy. Here's the twist. Many experts believe ambiguity is intentional. Declaring war unifies populations. It clarifies enemies. It forces clear choices. But ambiguity keeps people passive. It keeps conflicts compartmentalized. It allows leaders to escalate without triggering full-scale retaliation. It keeps daily life just normal enough that people don't demand drastic action. And in that environment, power can shift quietly, incrementally, almost invisibly. Look at history. The most dangerous moments aren't always the loud ones. They're the transitional ones. The periods where old rules stop working, but new rules haven't been established yet. That's where miscalculations happen. That's where small incidents spiral. A misinterpreted signal, a delayed response, a red line crossed accidentally, and when tensions are already high across multiple fronts, the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. Now let's talk about escalation. Because this is where everything converges, when proxy wars intensify, when cyber attacks become more aggressive, when economic pressure reaches breaking points, leaders face choices, back down and lose influence, or push forward and risk wider conflict. And history shows that under pressure, leaders don't always choose caution, especially when domestic instability makes appearing strong more important than being careful. This is why the question isn't just, as World War III started? The real question is, at what point do we admit it? Because labels matter. Once something is called a world war, public expectations change, military doctrines shift, alliances harden, escalation accelerates, and everyone involved knows that moment is irreversible. So there's a powerful incentive to avoid that label for as long as possible, even if the reality on the ground keeps drifting closer to it. So where does that leave us as individuals? Watching headlines, feeling that constant background tension, sensing that the world feels more fragile than it used to. The answer isn't panic. Panic helps no one. The answer is awareness. Understanding that the absence of dramatic visuals doesn't mean the absence of conflict. Understanding that war in the modern age can be slow, fragmented, and normalized. And understanding that by the time it becomes obvious to everyone, the most important decisions may already have been made. Here's the mind-blowing part. If this really is the opening phase of a new kind of world war, then history books won't mark its beginning with a single date. They'll point to a period, a shift, a gradual unraveling of old assumptions. And future generations may look back at this exact moment and say, that's when it became unavoidable, even though almost nobody realized it at the time. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think World War III has already begun in a new, quieter form? Or do you think the real breaking point is still ahead of us? What sign do you think matters most? Proxy wars, cyber attacks, economic pressure, or something else entirely? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them, and these discussions matter. If this video made you stop and think, share it with someone who needs to hear this perspective. Not to scare them, but to make them aware. And if you want to stay ahead of stories like this, stories that don't just report what happened but explore what it means, subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay with the channel. Because the most dangerous thing about the next global war might not be how it starts, but how long it takes for us to realize we've been living inside it all along.